Formula One teams these days are well-oiled machines. They have to work in unison as a company to stand any chance of success. But if we look back through history, there have been plenty of examples of teams that make you wonder how they even entered the sport to begin with. Which team ended with its owner being arrested in the paddock? And which team didn't even have enough money to buy an engine? Stay tuned as we count down the worst teams ever to race in Formula One. What's the meaning of life? Well, for Ernesto Vida, it was a reference to the meaning of his last name. And in 1989, it was the name of his brand new Formula One team. Vida had entered the sport with life and was committed to doing things differently. They were using an unconventional engine bought from a former Ferrari engineer, Franco Rocchi. This engine was combined with a chassis designed by the company First Racing to take a shot at Formula One success. Things were looking up when they were able to sign Gary Brabham, the son of three-time world champion Sir Jack Brabham, but the excitement didn't last long. After failing to qualify in 2 races, Gary left the team. He said that the Life team didn't even have basic parts like a tachometer or tire pressure gauge. So it's no wonder then that they never made it further than 8 laps into a session without having mechanical or technical problems. After 14 races and not a single qualification, Life officially withdrew their team. That's a pretty short life if you ask me. This next team was founded by 2 passionate Spaniards, Adrian Camps and Jose Ramon Caravante. The team had its origins in the Campos team that competes in Formula 3 and the GP2 series. In 2009, HRT was formed and was granted entry into the 2010 World Championship season. But Bernie Ecclestone, who was then still in charge of F1, had a few concerns about how the team would be able to finance their operation. His concern turned out to be well-founded, as HRT was not able to participate in the preseason winter testing. But they continued, determined to make it through the season. Karan Chandhok, who you might now know as a Sky Sports commentator, was announced as their second driver along with Breno Senna. At the opening race at the Bahrain Grand Prix, the 2 drivers were more than 8 seconds off the qualifying time of Sebastian Vettel. But during the race, Chandhok crashed early while Senna's car was retired with a heating issue. That kind of performance came to define the HRT team, whose best finish was P14, still out of the points. Although they didn't have any success, they did have some good drivers come through their ranks, including Daniel Ricciardo and Bruno Senna. I guess everyone has to start somewhere. I wonder if Ricciardo ever thinks of his time at HRT. This next one had a much longer lifespan. They competed in 46 Grand Prix, but unfortunately didn't score any points. It was partially owned by wealthy former racing driver Walter Brune, who owned teams in the World Sports Car Championship. Brune had a pretty good run there and even won the 1986 title. It was good enough to boost his confidence into thinking that Formula One was a possibility, so he got together with the Euro racing team and Euro Brune was born. Their first entry would be in the 1989 season. Back then, teams were not obliged to enter 2 cars into the season, and by midpoint of the year, Euro Brune only had enough manpower for 1. But by the next season, they were back to 2 cars and hoping to steal some points. They employed Brazilian driver Roberto Moreno, who scored the best finish for the team. It was at the United States Grand Prix, and he qualified at P16 before moving up to P13 during the race. But Moreno didn't stay long on the team. He was clearly outperforming the car, but he didn't get much of a chance to prove it. Out of 76 races the team entered, they only started 21. Moreno later claimed that the reason for so few starts was because Euro Brune actually didn't have enough money for extra tires or engines in case anything went wrong. Not enough money for tires? You're probably in the wrong business, guys. Which team was run by a mafia-connected boss who was arrested in the paddock? And which team didn't have enough money to buy an engine? Don't go anywhere, because all of that is coming right up. Next, 40 Course. What is it with Italians and racing teams? Anyone who's anyone seems to want to get into the business and make their mark. Italian businessman Guido Forti was no exception. He founded the Forti Corse racing team in the 1970s and actually had a lot of success. They racked up 4 drivers' championship trophies in Italian Formula 3 and by the 1990s thought that they were ready for the big league. Forti then partnered with another businessman, Abilio dos Santos Diniz, in exchange for his son Pedro driving for the team. So he had the money, he had the experience, and now Ford Corse was ready to go. Looking at the 2 seasons they competed in, it's a mix of retired, did not qualify, and not classified. Their highest finish was by Deniz's son Pedro in 7th place at the Australian Grand Prix, but in those days that wasn't enough to score a point. But Forti Corse is written into the history books as one of the last privateer teams that struggled to find financing. By the time the team had produced a decent chassis, they were running out of money. Forti made a last-ditch effort to keep racing by making a deal with a team called Shannon Racing, but Forti claimed that the team hadn't paid him the money for the purchase. Eventually, Forti withdrew the team from Formula One and faded into obscurity. Gone, but not forgotten. Up next, MasterCard Lola. Talk about a one-hit wonder. This team only competed in one race, but it definitely wasn't a wonder. MasterCard Lola was the brainchild of Eric Broadley, who had been a successful car designer. Lola was a British engineering company that Broadley founded and designed cars for drivers like John Surtees and Graham Hill. After a successful history as a building partner, Broadley thought that he might as well give it a shot himself. Broadley had planned to enter Formula One with the team in 1998, but their title sponsor, MasterCard, pressured them into entering a year earlier. This meant that their own engine wasn't developed in time and they had to use a Ford unit from 1996. So the team had been rushed to start and they didn't have their engine in time. What could go wrong? Unfortunately for Broadley, after a long career manufacturing race cars, his first attempt at an F1 team would end in complete disaster. It was the opening race of 1997 in Australia, but the Lola team wouldn't live to see the race. During qualifying, the best times of the two drivers were more than 11 seconds off the pace. By the 107% rule that prohibits cars from qualifying if they're too slow, the Lola cars had their weekend stopped short. It was totally humiliating and one of the worst starts to an F1 campaign ever mounted. Unsurprisingly, Lola didn't last much longer. In fact, they didn't even make it onto the next race. The team withdrew before the next round in Brazil. That might be the new MasterCard ad. Entering F1, tens of millions of dollars, losing by 11 seconds? Priceless. Next, how the hell does a shoe designer end up owning a Formula One team? Meet Andrea Sassetti. He's a wealthy Italian who either made his fortune through designing shoes, his family, the mafia, or gambling. And his life sounded like it too. He now owns restaurants, nightclubs, and construction companies. But back in 1991, he had a single dream: to own an F1 team. Sassetti bought the Coloni F1 team, and apparently at one point he wandered the floor of his shoe factory to try and find mechanics for his new team. Then, in something like a scene out of a movie, his factory was set on fire and he was shot out while trying to escape. That was in 1992 when the team was just entering the sport. The Andrea Moda cars were not ready for the beginning of the season, and by the time they arrived in South Africa, they weren't allowed to enter anyway. That was because Sassetti hadn't paid the $100,000 required for new teams to enter. They didn't run in the race either, and this earned the team some complaints from their drivers. When the team finally did get to run a race at the Monaco Grand Prix, one driver failed to qualify while the other retired after 11 laps with an engine failure. Then another payment failure meant that at the next race they had no luck either. This time Sassetti hadn't paid for their engines. That's a pretty important part of a Formula One car. To finish it all off, Sassetti was arrested while inside the paddock at the Belgian Grand Prix. That was it for the FIA, and they banned the team for the rest of the season. That's what happens when the mafia meets motorsport. Which short-lived team was your favorite? Are there any recent teams that you think might make this list? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.